Yeah, and I like how you're at least 18 years old.
Actually,
I like how you're at least 18.
As a child and even to today, I have always had a love for fantasy, and especially fantasy media that involves vampires. But as I've grown up and have become more knowledgeable and more mature, I've realized that a lot of the pieces of media that I grew up with have a lot of problematic stuff, such as creepy age gaps. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about why vampires are such creeps, and if you guys are interested in that, keep on watching. Hi guys, welcome back to Ella Pastoral. If this is your first time ever coming upon this channel right here, you've actually stumbled upon my Ella Enchanted series, where I'm going to be talking about my favorite horror movies, as well as talking about my favorite mythological characters. And as you guys saw and heard by my little intro, today we're going to be talking about vampires, and why a lot of the favorite and most popular vampire media involves vampires being creeps to young girls. So the first thing that inspired me to make this video is Twilight.
I just wanted to take a quick break from the regularly scheduled content to thank all of my Patreons who are currently subscribed to my Patreon. Thank you at Harriana Hook, Blythe, Charlie, Alex, and Brian for all subscribing to my Patreon. It seriously means a lot. If you want to be included in my Patreon shout out, please make sure to subscribe to my Patreon. We have a lot of fun things to offer over there. And now let's get back to the regularly scheduled content.
So I already did a comprehensive deep dive about why I feel like Twilight and Stephanie Myers is mad problematic, and I'm going to include it in my Ella Enchanted 2022 playlist. But when I was rewatching my video, I realized I didn't talk about how creepy the relationship between Edward and Bella is. I talked about all of the other problematic aspects that made up Twilight, but I didn't talk about the main problematic aspect, which was the romance. And so today I'm gonna be reading from my handy dandy iPad per usual. So if you guys don't know anything about Twilight, let me give you a quick little synopsis. So Twilight is a book series written by Stephanie Myers that became a cultural phenomenon as soon as these books were transformed and put into movies. Twilight as a series has captured the attentions of millions of readers around the world, but one of the most troubling aspects of this book series that I feel like a lot of people don't really tap into most definitely has to be the romantic relationship between Edward Cullen and Bella Swan. And while the series is marketed as a young adult romance book, the age difference between Edward and Bella is significant, with Edward being over 100 years old and Bella being only a 17-year-old girl. Power dynamics between Bella and Edward are really astonishing if you go back and watch Twilight as an adult, with Bella being manipulated by Edward several times and her life practically ending when she turns 18, married and trapped to Edward for the rest of her life. And what led me to this conclusion is really looking at Twilight from an adult's gaze. So when I was growing up, I was just entranced about how Bella was able to escape her very boring, mundane life by getting involved with the Cullen family and getting involved with sexy Edward. But when I really started looking at Twilight from my adult gaze, I really realized that the entire Cullen family are predatory weirdos who really don't care about Bella. So when you look at Twilight, you have to ask, why are these 100-year-old vampires in high school? Like, I don't know about you guys, but being in high school was literally some of the worst times I've ever been alive. And that is mostly due to the fact that I had to be around hormonal teenagers whose brains were still developing and had no emotional control. Like the fact that Edward and the rest of his family are consensually choosing to go back to high school over and over and over again makes me look at them like they're predatory weirdos. And especially if you look at the scene where Bella goes to Edward's house and he's like, yeah, I've been at college before. It makes me really look at the Cullens like, you guys are weird, because you guys have the opportunity and the resources to go to college and be with people who, even though they're younger than you, are developmentally adults. You choose to be in situations where you're around minors. Like, guys, I really want you to look at yourselves right now if you're over 18 and tell me, would you go back to high school? Would you go back to hang around little kids who, guys, no shade to teenagers, but their problems are literally blown out of proportion. And the fact that they continue to go to high school over high school over high school makes me look at them like they're weirdos. And if you've read the books, which I haven't, but I've been making friends with people who have, the Cullens have college degrees. So I asked the question, why are these people in high school? And if you guys really look at the timeline of Twilight and really look at the events, I promise all of that nonsensical nonsense happens under 2 years.
And at this point, Bella and Edward have been dating for like
a few months.
Just hearing the phrase Edward and Bella have been dating for a few months makes me I just want to remind everyone that their whole timeline, the time that they spend together from Twilight to Breaking Dawn, is under 2 years. Like, they truly only spend a couple months together, like throughout the whole of the 4 books. As a refresher, Bella arrives to Forks, Washington on Monday, January 17th, 2005. The next day, January 18th, she has the encounter with Edward where he's like, oh my God, I'm gonna unalive everyone in this classroom, and he goes to Alaska for a week. So they've spent an hour together. I can't remember how long biology is, right? But for the whole week, she's like obsessed with him. But they've spent 1 hour together in which he fantasizes about unaliving her the entire time. Comes back on January 24th. The next day, January 25th, is the car accident with Tyler. On January 26th, Edward starts ignoring Bella, and he does so until March 2nd. So by March 2nd, 2005, they have had 2 interactions, one of which is him wanting to unalive her, and the second of which is him basically saving her from the car accident. On March 2nd of 2005, Bella gets asked to the dance by Mike, by Eric, and by Tyler, and it's like too much for Edward. The next day, March 4th, is the blood typing scene, and when they sit together at the cafeteria and like when they finally start talking. So this is like their 3rd interaction. The day after that, Edward goes haunting, so he's like gone for a bunch of other days. Next Tuesday, March 8th, Bella goes to Port Angeles. This is when Edward like saves her in Port Angeles, and they have dinner and they have the whole conversation that he's a vampire, and then they're like a couple. Wednesday and Thursday of that week, they play 20 questions with each other every day, and then that weekend they go to the meadow. They have had like 5 days worth of interactions at this point. Edward spends the night, and then on Sunday, March 13th, they play baseball, and James, Victoria, and Laurent arrive on the scene. By Friday, March 18th, Bella's awakening in the hospital in Phoenix. The blood typing scene is on March 3rd. By March 18th, Edward has decided he's going to leave Bella at some point. In May of 2005, they go to the prom. They spend June, July, and August of 2005 together, but we don't get that in the books. It's in between Twilight and New Moon. 13th, 2005 is Bella's birthday. That is when Jasper tries to chomp chomp. September 16th, 2005, Edward leaves, and he leaves for 7 months. Leaves September 16th, 2005. On April 20th, 2006, Bella and Edward reunite in Volterra. Clip starts off in May of 2006, and it just takes up May and June of 2006. That's it. And Breaking Dawn takes us from August of 2006 to December of 2006. So the whole timeline of the books is under 2 years. It's like 23 months. And please never forget that Edward Cullen is gone for 7 of those months. I've seen couples on 90 Day Fiancé who spent more time together than Edward and Bella.
Bella meets this dude, gets entrapped with his vampire nonsense, gets pregnant, dies, becomes a vampire in all under 2 years. The Cullens are bad for Bella, and I really feel like her ending up with Edward was the bad ending, especially seeing as she had Jacob, somebody who was actually around her age, as a love interest. Really goes to show you that as soon as Bella met Edward, she had no opportunity to escape the toxic future that she really had. And the power dynamic that we can see in the whole entire Twilight series is really troubling and perpetuates the idea that it is acceptable and even desirable for someone who is more experienced, knowledgeable, to pursue you when you're young, naive, and not knowing what the real world is. And I really feel like that's troubling because, guys, there are a lot of predators out there, and the fact that Twilight practically perpetuated this romance, and the fact that it's still one of the top teen movies of all time, really makes me look at the movie series and Stephanie Meyers so unseriously, especially if you guys had read Midnight Sun, where the genders are reversed. It literally perpetuates like really it just perpetuates a lot of nonsense. And furthermore, the relationship between Edward and Bella is portrayed as obsessive and possessive. Edward is being shown as super overprotective of Bella, going to the point of stalking her, controlling her, and literally ruining her life. This behavior is not healthy or romantic, and the fact that it is presented as that in the series is super concerning. Y'all remember the scene where Edward literally abandoned Bella after literally changing her life and introducing her to the supernatural world, and literally Bella goes into the extreme self-harming behavior. And the fact that Bella never fully realizes how toxic and entranced she is by Edward really goes to show you that Twilight is a travesty. But let me continue. The Twilight series also perpetuates harmful gender stereotypes, with Bella being weak and helpless and in constant protection from Edward and even Jacob at times. Like, remember when she threw herself over the cliff to see Edward's face and Jacob literally had to save her? Like, Bella was giving useless at several times throughout the whole entire Twilight franchise. It was a mess to see. The way Bella is presented really goes to show you, at least in the Twilight universe, that women aren't able to take care of themselves and consistently need a man to protect them. If it's not Edward, then it's Jacob. And if it's not Edward, then it's the Cullen family, with most of them being the men. Additionally, with the fact that this young girl, who I promise is under the age of 19, is willing to give up her whole life to be with Edward is just so problematic. And the fact that she was willing to end her life to practically bring Renesmee into the world is a whole different topic that we can talk about later, but that was a mess. That situation was a mess. And even though I really feel like the Twilight series is very entertaining and I consistently watch it with my friends when we need a good laugh or pick me up during the semester when school is treating us like we're not people, Twilight has a lot of problematic aspects that I feel like if younger people are going to watch it, they need somebody to like talk to them afterwards so they don't internalize a lot of the problematic things that are in Twilight. Like, you should never be like, I need a man like Edward, ever. If you need a man that's like Edward, baby girl, you need therapy. And that brings me to another very popular vampire media that is just so problematic that I had to bring it up in this Why Vampires Are Creeps video, and that is Vampire Diaries. So in the early 2000s, there was a trend that emerged in YA literature and television, and this had to be vampire romances. These stories often featured a teenage girl falling in love with a mysterious and dangerous vampire, resulting in drama and conflict. One of the most popular examples of a TV show that had this premise was Vampire Diaries. The show followed the main character, Elena Gilbert, a high school student in a small town of Mystic Falls, Virginia, as she falls in love with the vampire known as Stefan Salvatore. However, Stefan's evil brother Damon also becomes enamored with Elena, leading to a love triangle that spans the show's several seasons. While Vampire Diaries was undeniably entertaining, it also perpetuates a lot of troubling aspects. One of the most concerning being the idea that teenagers should be attracted to dangerous and even violent, abusive partners. Stefan and Damon were both prone to violent outbursts, and the show often portrayed their behavior as romantic and even sometimes desirable. And additionally, the show's treatment of consent was borderline murky at best. Stefan and Damon both compelled people to do their bidding, eventually mind controlling them in very disturbing ways. This was presented as a necessary evil, but it's hard to argue that it's ever acceptable to take away people's agency in that way. These themes are particularly concerning given the target audience being teenagers. Young viewers may internalize the idea that they should be attracted to partners who are bad boys but still love them at the end of the day. And it's also important to know that the Vampire Diaries isn't the only show that perpetuates these weird issues with consent. True Blood did it. I think Twilight did it. Practically, if there's any show that has vampires with powers, they're gonna have really weird issues surrounding consent. But I really feel like this show was really marketed towards teenagers. It was on the CW, for God's sake. But it was just weird. It was just weird. And I also want to talk about the weird fact that all of the main love interests were creeps. Damon specifically always rubbed me the wrong way because as a old vampire that he was, not only did he fight for the Confederacy, that always made me look at him like sideways, heavy on the sideways, but he also would consistently do the vertical tangle with teenagers, which always made me look at him like he was a weirdo. Like, I always believe, and I will stick by this even until I'm old and withered away, but a lot of these shows can just involve college students to still have the same vibe, and I just don't understand why it's such an emphasis to have teenagers involved in the nonsense. So now I'm going to break away from talking about how problematic American vampire media is, and I want to go all the way to Japan to talk about how problematic their vampire media is too. I did a video talking about all of the problematic stuff that was in one of my favorite vampire animes of all time, and that most definitely has to be Vampire Nights. It's somewhere in the Ella Enchanted playlist. I'll link it up above. But at least for Vampire Nights, the plots was given good. The plots and the interpersonal dynamics and the turmoil left you wanting for more. But I'm not here to talk about Vampire Night. I'm here to talk about one of the worst animes I've ever watched, vampire media excluding that fact, and that has to be Diabolical Lovers. My best friend loves this anime, but I'm here to say that Diabolical Lovers was awful. And from going on TikTok and talking to people who have like really been in the Diabolical Lovers fandom, it mostly has to do with the fact that the adaptation from like the manga into the anime was garbage. But if I didn't like the anime, there's no way I'm gonna pick up the manga to get the true experience. The main reason why I don't like Diabolical Lovers most definitely has to do with the fact that it wasn't adapted well. The reason why I can't stand Diabolical Lovers is that I feel like it's one of the most disjointed pieces of media that I've ever read / engaged in. Because I promise you, I've watched it twice because my best friend was like begging me to give the series another chance. And even after knowing the plot, reading the Wikipedia, watching the anime leaves me so confused, like I skipped episodes or something, which I didn't. But let me talk about why Diabolical Lovers was just annoying. The Diabolical Lovers, instead of having weird age gaps, they have massive violations of consent. Like all vampire media is going to be a little icky when it comes to consent because vampires are immortal, powerful beings. But this anime was just so gross. And the main character, I believe her name is like Yui, just has no agency. Watching Diabolical Lovers literally gave me the ick because Yuki was literally a rag doll that these group of brothers would abuse and use at every chance that they got. And it was just so disturbing to watch because Yuki wouldn't even try to fight back at some points, and it was just so gross. Like the main dude, I forgot his name, but literally at every chance that he got, he would slap around, push Yuki around like she wasn't a person. And they literally used Yuki as a blood bank. And the thing about vampire romance is that there's supposed to be at least a little bit of something to let the audience be okay with the fact that vampires are so, like, they're such awful people. But nobody in this show deserved love and or grace. Like literally none of the male leads were nice, kind, romantic to Yuki. They all used Yuki as a punching bag, which was like, this is supposed to be a vampire romance. Why isn't it giving romance? It's giving abuse. And I can't even put into words how sick the anime made me. And Diabolical Lovers was just a mess. It just was so nonsensical. The main female character literally didn't have a backbone and literally would never fight back. Like she would push the dude for 2 seconds and be like, womp womp, and give up. And I just feel like this was just so awful. And the fact that people kept trying to recommend me this awful piece of work was just gross. I'm like, don't watch that anime. It's awful. Like, it's not even awful in a good way. We can get a couple laughs in. And yeah, I really feel like the whole trope of letting vampires be creeps is such a mess. Especially when they are creeps in a way where they go after young girls and minors. Because now that I'm an adult, I didn't know that there was a whole genre of books that are for adults because I was a kid. And I just know from reading adult works now that it is possible for vampires to go after people who are above 18. Because I was like doing research for this and trying to look for why vampires go after such young girls. And they were like, oh, vampires are so old that age doesn't matter to them anymore because everybody who's younger than them is going to seem like a minor. And I was like, okay, with that logic, why don't they go for actual mature women? Like women who are 30 would still have that wild age gap as a woman, not even a woman, a girl who's like 15, 17. Like the fact that they are choosing to let these female leads be underage is weird, when vampires would still see like a 35-year-old, a 25-year-old as young, like kiddish to them at that point. At least go for somebody whose brain is developed, you know? Because I know that authors have an ability to write stuff like that because I found it now that I'm an adult. And I just hope that in the future for vampire media, we can start seeing adults be in these age gap relationships. Like, it's possible, guys, I promise. So let me know, is there any other weird vampire media that you guys have known about where vampires are creeps and going after young girls? Like, expand my knowledge on this topic so I know which vampire media to avoid. If you guys like this video, make sure that you hit the thumbs up button and make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell notification button. I have a bunch more videos coming out for this Ella Enchanted series, so I'll see you guys next week. Bye!